I was scared of that. Okay, welcome back. I'm gonna send the link over to Emily and then hopefully I'll do this the right way. You're on mute.
I said, I know Catherine has done the shuffle for us before, so I think it's possible, but yeah, I wouldn't know how.
It's possible. I clicked the wrong button. So I'm just gonna make sure that Emily can come in and then okay. Okay. So I will just leave the meeting now.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
Okay, it looks like it's stuck this time, and I am the host. We should wait for Emily, and I think also we need her for a quorum of this subgroup. So,
Sounds good.
okay.
The plan is to talk about the LMI eligible entities, right? Is that
Yeah, and I'm sensitive to everyone's time and keeping this short. I do think we might want to just talk about the potential study, which we'll talk about again next week, but I think there are some potential credit issues, things we could talk about. And I think this group can decide how if now is when we want to take it and what we want to do with that. So I'm gonna hope that Emily's able to join us. I could send her the link, I think. I don't know why she didn't. I just grabbed it from the calendar and joined that back. I'm gonna
it's
send it
also
to
on the
her.
PUC?
Oh, there she is. Yay. Hi, Emily. Can you just make sure, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can now.
Sorry about that. Sometimes my mic takes a moment to log in. I'm here and I'm participating. I'm off camera. I have someone in the house doing some housework, but I'll be listening in. And
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Well, if the three of us, that's a quorum, so we can do this. Yeah, so I was just mentioning to Ben, I think the main reason I kind of kept this meeting on the books was that we should ideally come up with a way to move forward with this LMI serving institutions memo. I do think that it might be helpful to preview the potential study, and I think there are things that from a credit subgroup point of view that we may want to just talk about. I don't think it has to be a decision, but it might be good to start laying some groundwork for that. So
I agree.
yeah, okay, great. Yeah, and we don't have to make this super long today, but yeah, so I don't think with the LMI serving institutions memo, I don't think we got a super clear um indication from the group exactly how to move forward with this. It seems like a majority of people would probably sign on if we made it more specific to the property that is like, again, I think there's a difference here, but like either housing low and moderate income households or like the site at which services are happening for those households. And was not able to get a sense of for the group if one was much more preferable than the others. I think when we discussed this as a group, it felt like we were pretty happy with the original language and thought that was sort of an equitable, landing on not taking away benefits, but providing more avenues. And I was a little surprised that the full group like didn't really like have the same perspective to it. And I think it's always hard to tell how that will go. The thing that's really making me wonder if we should try again with the full group is that the draft potential study, which we can talk about in more detail, does say what we had kind of thought, that it might be really challenging to find enough low and moderate income projects. So in this case, I don't know that it the equity issues of, serving a lower moderate income household and who should be first in line for this is changed by it. But it doesn't look like we're going to be crowding out projects from doing this. I guess a homeless shelter could be more preferable to serve than a house that's like super old and has extensive problems that you need to do work. So I could see in that case potentially crowding it out, but we're talking on the margins here at this point. So I guess Ben, Emily, if you have any thoughts on, do we want to try to get the group on board with our original language or find a way to refine it that we think it's more narrowly tailored? I don't know if either of you have thought about that.
Mia, do you have the document pulled up?
Yes, I can share it. Yeah.
I guess, yeah, I agree with you in responding to potential study, and I just wonder, maybe once we have that document up, we can add a sentence or two, maybe mentioning that and your reasoning behind not being overly concerned around overcrowding and taking up low and moderate income credits or low income credits.
Yeah, okay, that sounds good. Oh, and I'm gonna save this on my desktop. Yeah, sure. I'll save this here. This is where everyone gets to see horrible lack of organization. Okay, so I can make edits in this, and then we can bring it to the full group. But this is Catherine's notes on the comments of our original one. And so yeah, that'll have to be changed. Yeah, I don't think that's a bad idea to add some comments about like, something to the effect of, I can always do this later, but comments on potential lack of credits from potential study, and this reduces concerns about crowding out. I mean, I think there are not like no concerns about crowding out. Like, I think if you're not careful about the definition of like services, you get into hospitals, and I do think a hospital project could like probably wipe out, if you consider that a low and moderate income project. So I do think there's like some version of this where it does cause harm, but I don't think our version originally did it. But I do think that's a good, yeah.
I think I think let's see the comment here from looks like Pike raised the issue. Jeff did, yeah. Yeah, Jeff raised the point, yeah, that's right. About basically, I think the primary concern that I heard was that we didn't have specific enough language to refer to the residents that the folks are, people are living in. So I think we had essentially said, hey, if it's a nonprofit like CVOEO, like if they have an administrative building, then that would count. Which I think we had broadly kind of opined initially that like, any help that we're giving the nonprofit institution, or any, services they had at any buildings would effectively save money or, conserve their resources so they could then serve more low and moderate income individuals. I think that makes perfectly good sense. I don't see any issue with that, especially considering the potential study results showing that, it's going to be potentially extremely difficult or near impossible to hit the 16% target with a low income population. In Vermont. I think I can jump quickly to that. The potential study. It is as stated by NV5 at the TAG meeting last week, and in our conception at the department is that really the reason why the attainment of low income, is not hitting the 16% is because there may not be enough emissions from low-income households in Vermont to constitute 16%. Like, there's just not enough total emissions to to even hit that target, if that makes sense. Like, there's just the volume of emissions isn't there. So So yeah, that makes it challenging. And in that analysis, we know that half of that 16% obligation needs to be installed measures. The other half needs to be, or can be
delivered,
can
yeah.
be can be fuel. Yeah. So yeah, there's an issue there. I think honestly broadening that definition could help attainment in that area. I really don't see how that would cause harm. I'm struggling to see how that would be harmful to low-income folks. I think that the point that Jeff made is that, hey, like if an obligated party might rather go insulate or weatherize an administrative building where no one lives than, a complicated, like super old, Victorian house where there's people living in it and pets and, it just makes it harder. So if given the opportunity, they might go for the administrative building where, maybe the folks that work there could vacate while they weatherize, and it'll just be like an easier project overall. So, yeah, it's a tricky one, I guess. I'm kind of torn. On one hand, I think we should try to bring it up to the group again, but on the other hand, I don't know how much time we need to spend to try to convince other members of the group that this is a good idea. Because if they're kind of strong in their convictions, then it might be just a fruitless effort. So
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we might be able to get a little bit more time, since we've already previewed it and explained like why we kind of don't think that it's super likely. I think there is a point where if you could expand this way too, like any nonprofit organization, you could get some shady stuff done. And I do think the savings from like a really big school or hospital project could potentially lean like actually you'd find a need to do that. So I think there's like some point where that doesn't match with the intent of the legislation for low income households. Even then, this is a question of, yeah, I don't know if this needs to be changed in the statute or whatever. There's a separate conversation we started on last time about like, well, what do they mean by household? Because or I think Act 18 says customer, which is even like less clear than household. And so that could cause problems if like depending on how much leeway the PUC has in saying, okay, a customer can be like a tenant who pays for heat in their electricity. So yeah, some of this gets down to like, I don't know that we're clear on the boundaries of like how far you can put this low income customer thing into the which ultimately I think is the PUC's problem essentially, and eventually the legislature to sort of ratify whether they need to make changes to the statute if they want to pursue that. But yeah, I don't we're in kind of unusual territory with trying to say like, well, when they said low income households, like, is this something that was ever contemplated, and if not, like, should it have been?
I can see how it easily would not be contemplated because they're kind of specifically targeted this at low income households. Although the language is I think the intent of this section could be debated. You got the usage of the word customer, like you said, it says 16% from customers with low income, additional 16% from customers with low or moderate income. And then it goes on to say, at least one half of these credits shall be installed clean heat measures that require capital investment in homes, that have measure lives of 10 years or more. So,
yeah.
And then it also goes on to say the commission may identify additional measures that qualify as installed measures. So yeah, so AKA like, custom projects or new clean heat projects in the future. But yeah, so that would be effectively saying, I think a customer is broad enough so that we could, include, like, for example, a nonprofit institution, I guess, is a customer, but whether or not equating saying a nonprofit would be like eligible for this means that the nonprofit potentially would have to be lower moderate income themselves. I'm not sure, but being a nonprofit, they're don't have any income. So
yeah, I mean, we're deal with that with landlords. Like landlords don't have, I mean, under what the PUC has sort of indicated but not yet committed to, you can be a higher income landlord with low income tenants, and you know, if you're doing it in your property that serves that houses these tenants, like yeah, I think there's going to be some flavors of this that aren't like the legislature wasn't necessarily thinking about, but doesn't necessarily like want to preclude. And I think this is an open question of whether it's one of these things where they'd be like, no, that's not what anyone was thinking about, or oh yeah, that's a good idea, that's fine. You know, like I think it could take either of those turns, and it's certainly not going to be like the biggest issue that they're thinking of. But
for sure. Yeah. So to that end, I think that it is totally in our wheelhouse to, send something to the commission for consideration on this topic. Whether or not they want to adopt what we say is their prerogative. But I think, given that the potential study, does show that there is a lack of attainment of the statutory target of 16%, I think it is incumbent upon us to basically think about how we can get additional attainment given that result. I'm like fully supportive of this memo. I guess I guess what we're talking about now, as we all know, is like how we can tailor this to get folks to vote yes on it in the full group. Yeah, and it seems as though most folks who objected to this in the full group, granted we only I think we took it up in like the last 10 minutes of the meeting, so maybe it was folks didn't have enough time to fully read it, but most of the major issue that people were hung up on was whether or not you're diverting resources from households. And I don't know how else we can explain that, but I just don't think that's the case, because if you're saving a cap agency money, they're able to then serve more households. So it's it seems to be a no-brainer for me. But
well,
yeah.
yeah, so I'm thinking about this definition that we have that's on screen. And one, I think Pike's point that the property could be owned or rented, because it is, I hadn't thought about that. It is like common to have a long-term lease and stuff. And I think that's not a bad idea to just put rented. I don't know how that works with like the property owner, like it's okaying that, but like certainly with business space, like it's not that uncommon to have a long-term lease in a building you don't own. So not the worst idea to put rented in there at all.
It makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a minimum we should put that in. I think one way to get this to work in the group would be to say something we contemplated but rejected, which was the property must be the site of services provided, and we can probably come up with a better definition, but like, so that's not the administrative head office, but like some sort of services have to happen on like in the structure that you are weatherizing or doing heat pump or whatever.
Or
Do
the
you think,
clients are visiting for services. Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Emily, do you think that sounds like maybe I don't know if it makes a substantial difference to people who objected, but do you think maybe that's the way we try to do this, sort of split the difference?
Yeah, this all makes sense to me. And I wonder if we have time on the agenda to, when we like bring this up, to just take a couple minutes to explain that piece about the potential study, and then also maybe just like acknowledge just acknowledge like the different, I think maybe just walking through the memo more fully might just give us a little bit more time. But I agree with everything that you and Ben suggested so far.
Yeah, I can share about time. We keep getting these to the end of the discussion because of like just like visitors and making sure that there's enough room for that to breathe. So that has been a challenge, but I'll see what we can do with that, because yeah, I do think that's we did so far in the draft schedule we have the potential studies before this, so hopefully that part will be sort of briefed, that like that's a big red flag. I do think we'll probably get into some stuff about like costs and stuff and like just stuff that's going around with that. But I think I can definitely say like this is an important thing, that there just might not be enough sort of credit producing activities around. So I think that'll tee off this discussion, but it's a good point, and I'll work with Ashira to see if we can get enough time in our schedule to really do this.
Agree. And I think given the really, I think in terms of substantive changes to this document, in light of what you just said, and I think Emily just agrees, is that we have new information on the potential study that shows this issue with potentially not reaching that LMI target. So really, I see it's pretty clear here. Like, if we don't make this suggestion and to basically expand the pool of eligible LMI credit, places you can get LMI credits from, then the only other option is to decrease that target. So in my mind, it's like, rather than decreasing the target and basically serving less LMI folks, we just expand that pool of eligible LMI places you can get LMI credits from, so that effectively we don't want to lower that target. I think that should be a pretty cornerstone key issue for our group, is that the last thing we want to do is lower targets for LMI, right? So if we can bring these nonprofit institutions into the fold, yes, they may not be residents, and technically they're folks aren't living in these buildings, etc. But back to our original overarching point here, is that they ultimately are allowing these organizations to serve more people that need the help. And I think that's what we have to remember. We can't forget that there will be one-offs, like the example that Jeff brought up, that hey, insulating these buildings, as I mentioned earlier, the obligated parties might be more excited about weatherizing these administrative style buildings than like a household that might be more complicated. But there's only so many of those, and I kind of see it as like can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think if some of these administrative buildings were weatherized in the early years of the program, then so be it. Those institutions now have more money or more resources to serve people, and then and then households will eventually be the only remaining pool of places to get these installed credits from. So it's kind of just.
I don't know that it is gonna. I don't know if someone's done a number of like buildings that are like used for nonprofit activities, but I doubt it's enough to move the needle. But it can't hurt. Yeah, I don't know.
It couldn't hurt, and I think also too, one thing to consider. Yes, there may not be a lot of buildings, but maybe some of these buildings are just like using a ton of resources. Maybe they just have a super high fuel bill or electric bill. That is contributing, a substantial amount to that emissions, pool. So these could end up being like pretty big hits in terms of carbon reduction, which would allow, these entities to meet their target. So
just to bring it back. So Emily, Ben, how are you feeling about do we want to tailor it to services are offered there, or I don't know if I'm hearing, Ben, from you that you want to sort of stick to our guns and see if we can go for another one, or you want to try to tailor tailor it to like site of services. Do you which direction are you thinking of going with this?
I mean, I'm inclined to say that, if it's owned by the institution, then it still counts. In my experience, having worked for a cap agency in the past, there's not many buildings that clients don't get served at. I think that would be a rare, if we're talking about just like an administrative office, I'm not sure that like exists very often where only administrative people, because usually you have like a Head Start building where there's kids going to preschool and stuff there, or even the headquarters usually have family services division or economic services division, where clients do actively come in on an appointment basis and etc. So
maybe it doesn't matter. Yeah. I don't know. My agency does have, we're B2B, so there's no one coming into our office these days. Essentially, it's pretty rare. So I don't know if we'd pass the test, but I don't think we're meant to under this. So I don't know.
I mean, but
I
would
guess,
weatherizing your administrative offices help your organization? I don't see how it wouldn't, you know?
yeah, I think it would. I just don't know if that's what we intended. Like, it's just not
Yeah.
the headquarters of an agency that does lending is kind of different from a food shelf in, ways that I think we did try to, and I don't even know if my organization would do essential services because we're sort of a pass through. So we loan to people who provide the essential services. So maybe you would make the case that, like, I don't know that the essential services would be doing the work to do that type of thing. I think we've talked about the potential for abuse with this is fairly low because there are a fair amount of hoops to go through, and it is not clear that these projects are going to be like hugely desirable if we kind of keep it out of the hospital realm. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess I just, in terms of like how to move forward, I think adding the site specific thing might probably doesn't make a huge difference either way, but might make people feel better that there's less potential for abuse here.
I'm in favor of adding that if if people are amiable to that and it gets them to vote yes, basically. So, I think we need to meet folks where they're at. And so if that's what it takes, then I'm for it. Because I think it is important given the results of the potential study. We clearly need to expand that pool a little bit. The department we're doing our own economic analysis, post, the results have been released. So we're just going back through, the workbooks and stuff and just doing our own independent analysis because to try to get at, more narrowed cost figure that folks can grasp. That's not going to be forthcoming for a few weeks, but we might end up touching this piece of it with the LMI target. So that's TBD, but I can say that. So I know we did release the workbooks and stuff to the public, so folks, can all take a crack at trying to recreate, cost per gallon or however they want to do it. Whether or not folks' estimates are accurate or depend on methodology, I think, but
I support those additions. I think I would have supported not changing the language, but I agree with Ben that if that's the change that it takes to move this forward, that's fine. We're creeping up to October, so
Yeah, I think, yeah, and that's definitely a good point. Like we don't have a ton of time to spend on this. Yeah, I mean the PC could, I think Dominic is reviewing our stuff, and so they could kind of. I think we've had a discussion about it that's on the public record, and they can sort of choose to do what they will with that. So, yeah, okay. So I will add some text with your support that just talks about. I might noodle over it a little bit, but just like comments on, trying to think. Comments on the potential to lack of credits from the potential study. I'm just trying to think, like, it's basically going to say I can probably go into the potential study, but we can quote the potential study and say like the effect of it's not clear that the projects you could do. And, we've taken this into account with concerns about crowding out and decreasing services, projects that are ultimately, or I guess measures, measures that are ultimately targeted to low and moderate income households. Is that, I mean, I can say it more elegantly, but is that sort of a 2 or 3 sentence version of what we think? And decreasing targets is not desirable at this time.
exactly. That's really the crux of it. I think is that we want to capture and convey to the group. Yeah, would be that we either expand this pool to try to, to make sure that there's a path forward for obligated parties to meet that statutory target, or the target gets decreased. Because, I guess the action words for like the crux of the issue from the potential study would be that, I can put in the chat too if you want to use language, but it's basically
Yeah,
percent total cumulative annual life cycle emissions reduction for low-income households does not meet the target as estimated by the potential study. Kind of a
Yeah, if you
mouthful.
want to put that in, that would be nice, and I can put that in. Yeah. Is it called the potential study? Like,
It is. Let me give you the official
okay.
title.
Do you want to throw that in the chat too?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I believe it's the thermal carbon. It's funny, I have to check because it's like, yeah, we just refer to it as a potential study, but it's like, what is the official like in contract name? Do you? Yeah, thermal sector carbon reduction potential study. That's what.
Thermal sector, carbon
Reduction.
potential study
Yep,
from NV5,
correct.
prepared by NV5, I will say. NV5 has raised concerns that, and could you give me that language?
Yep, I'm typing it up right now.
Great, thanks.
Let me just.
Okay. Recently released, prepared, but has raised concerns that emissions reduction from low-income households falls short of the statutory target of 16%. Let's see.
I wonder at the end, in that statement that decreasing that requirement under Act 18 is not something that we want. I wonder if we can just add a sentence or two stating that, like, I don't know, reminding the audience of this letter that the reason we don't want to decrease the percentage, even though the potential study shows that we may fall short.
Yeah, like
there's other ways
decreasing
to
that
support
target
it.
is not desirable for our group, really. Yeah.
And also maybe just like a sentence saying that like there's other ways to support low income customers and residents due to the complex nature of supporting this group. I don't know. I'm just thinking of like a sentence that maybe demonstrates why we're adding this additional language and how it'll support low income households.
Yeah, okay, let me just think. So we've got the problem and caveat that's like, that doesn't mean you should reduce, is not desirable. I would say at this time, I don't think we think it's desirable. I don't know. I guess there's a future in which it's deemed necessary, but I think that would be the least desirable outcome. So I don't think it has to be, yeah. Despite the challenge in posed in producing low income credits under this CHS, the EEG feels that decreasing low or moderate income requirements under Act 18 is not desirable. This, I'm just trying to think of how we get there. This finding has reduced concerns. How about prior concerns that expanding the definition of a low or moderate income credits as outlined below could have the potential to crowd out projects serving the residences of low and moderate income households. Expanding the pool of potential credit. Let me just flow, and we'll figure out where this is going. The pool of potential credit producing projects while maintaining a link to activities that serve the essential needs of these households. I'm trying to think. May offer greater potential for achieving the goals under Act 18.
Yeah, I think that sums it up good. Yeah, because the
potential a lot, but greater
yeah, because it does. I mean, I was just looking at the potential study report, just to see if I could glean anything else from that section there. And yeah, so the language from NV5 in this case is, even when assuming all low and moderate income measures are adopted under the Act 18 optimized scenario, the low income requirement is not achieved. So they pretty much applied every measure that was, deemed to be like a low and moderate income credit producing measure. Like it still didn't get there. So, which was, primarily, weatherization. I mean, there's a whole suite of things for fuel switching, etc. So yeah. It is possible that there's, potentially some of the assumptions made in the study, we're not showing the full potential for that segment, but I don't know if we have that information at this point. I mean, further analysis is going to happen, so maybe additional information will come up. But I given the information we have at this moment, I think that's good language and makes sense.
Okay, so we could yeah, we can see sort of how people go with this. I mean, this discussion is making maybe like, I don't know, maybe the legislature should have contemplated something with public buildings and stuff, but I don't, that sounds very messy, and I don't know what you would do with that. But yeah, in terms of a better picture of where emissions are coming from. But yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I think
yeah,
16% was always kind of a guess, I think, but
sort of arbitrary. Yeah, and I think we also must recognize too, for the legislature didn't have this potential study to go off of, so this basically does quantify the, carbon reduction potential in the RCI sector. Given the information we have now, it's pretty clear that there might not be the emissions there that will achieve that target. So yeah, that's why I think this memo makes perfect sense to expand that.
okay, yeah, and I think Emily's point about, I think we just need to put in the work, and I could see if Ashira could share this and just be like, read this beforehand, and like, we had a discussion about the potential study, which will be doing this, and I'll make sure we talk about this, potentially serious issue, definitely serious issue about the lack of low income credits and what we do with this. So I think that was the feedback. I mean, I disagree with Srini about the specific list of organizations, because this is not usually how you do the writing the laws, because you'd have to update it all the time, and I don't think we could possibly contemplate the right flavor of saying, shelters versus, I don't know, transitional housing. Like it could get weird. So I think a list is going to be hard. I think like refugee support services is fine. I don't know if that counts as low income households, but like I think the legislature can figure out like how far you want to take that. Yeah, okay.
The definition of a refugee is like somebody that's unhoused. I mean, I don't know. Yes, they may not technically be low income, but they're a person in need.
Yeah, I doubt they're out of the moderate income bracket. I just don't know, like, I think we just need someone who's a lawyer to test this out and has experience writing legislation. So either the PUC or the legislature ultimately, if they want to run this, just the idea about the purpose of the organization and like low and moderate income, like,
I think it's the through line that counts here. The intent and the through line of this memo is what counts, and you're right. I think if we get this to the PUC or the commission, there are, there's general counsel there that has experience in this stuff and they can take it from there and, in terms of specifics, but I think the intent is what matters here.
Okay. Yeah, I feel pretty good about this. I think we can we can take another swing at this, and I don't know, we might have enough people who will vote for this. It didn't come to that. So yeah.
Right.
17th. Okay. So that sounds good. Is there, Emily, Ben, any more comments on this? I think we dealt with it.
Not from my end.
Okay, sounds good. I'm just gonna put percent. Okay. Okay, so I'll save this. I will send it to the group and then they can see the updated version. Okay. So I think we discussed last time about how we're gonna have to figure out how to deal with the draft rule when the PUC releases it, and that's gonna have to be dealt with sort of in the full group and probably also in the credit issues group, so we can bring kind of our like focus that we've cultivated through the course of this. I think the potential study has a similar flavor where, I mean, ultimately we don't have to do anything with the potential study, but it has some important information. I think we'll want to discuss it with the full group. I think there are things in here that, speak to marketplace issues, like the potential lack of credits is a real problem, or lack of, I guess, emissions to produce the credits is a real problem. I mean, I was thinking about we're going to get more data, I think, in December about measure characterizations. Is that correct, Ben? Or is it? I don't know when that's
that'll be from Opinion Dynamics.
Opinion
They are going to be creating, they're in the process of making the technical reference manual, which will be rather large amount of information because it is the EVT TRM, for example, is a few hundred pages long, quite detailed. I think the intent for the clean heat standard TRM is going to be the same. Measure characterizations and stuff. For example, the emissions factors for all the fuels just got released by Opinion Dynamics. Additionally, I think there is going to be not through the commission or the department, but through the legislature. I think the JFO is also going to be doing an economic analysis of the clean heat standard.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure where that process is at, but I know that the RFI was released for that, or the RFP was released for that. And I think the intent is for an economist or the JFO to have someone like NV5, it might end up being NV5, I'm not sure, whoever they select, to do the initial in-depth analysis ahead of the legislative session. So that'll be coming out as well, but that'll be too late for us to contemplate probably. Yeah. But yeah, as I mentioned, the department, we're doing an internal kind of economic analysis of our own, which will, we are basically going to give it our best shot to capture some of the nuances that might have been filtered out as part of this analysis. This analysis obviously the intent was to determine, basically, does the potential exist to hit the GWSA targets? It determined that it did. But, we have noticed that there are some nuances in how various measures were modeled over time. And some of the assumptions, for example, in the EVT-TRM might cut short, reductions that we see in reality from, weatherization projects that are happening today. So, there's going to be, I think over the next couple of months, I know at the department we're going to be releasing stuff. I know there's other groups that are going to, do their own analysis. So there's going to be kind of like on a rolling basis, like various people chiming in with their 2 cents. So
yeah, that's cool. I mean, so I guess my biggest thing was when I was looking at the list, I mean, like, we're kind of been focused on installed measures, and especially ones that are, likely to benefit, average households is kind of our flavor of our work. And, I was looking on the I forget what table it is, but I'm sure I could find it. It's like the top 10 measures by like potential. And, even though it nets out pretty highly in like total benefits, like air sealing is at the bottom of that list and insulation is not on that top 10 list. And I know this is like complicated, and I just don't like it's kind of like a what are we doing here thing. Like I don't I don't want to like try to just like break this, but it's just like we're seeing strong indications that people are not going to want to weatherize homes, and that's like a big thing that we're kind of driving towards with this, and the state has been driving towards. And I don't know what you do with that, but it does cast this project into doubt for me.
So I think that's, you kind of hit on what I was just referring to there. I think so I'm actually looking at the table right now. But yeah, heat pump water heaters, for example, is the biggest one on the list, followed by ductless heat pumps, then various other fuel switching measures. But yeah, the model did some funky stuff, that everyone can see by looking at, workbooks and stuff that were released last week. By funky, I mean just like basically, it was designed in a way to, most efficiently hit the target.
Yeah.
As laid out by GWSA. But yeah, there's a little disconnect with like the weatherization, for example. That's something we're looking into at the department. Does the study characterize weatherization, in a lens of reality, for example? I don't think it's off base by any means. It's still, I think, grounded, of course, in reality. But are there additional savings that are not being captured by the potential study is one question that we're just basically doing, analysis to make sure this is as accurate as we can provide. I do think that there potentially are savings that come from weatherization that are not being captured in the study, at least in the early years, the way it's modeled. So, yeah, from my perspective, yeah, there is some weatherization probably produces more emissions reductions than might be apparent in the study. From my perspective, that's not necessarily a departmental stance, but personally, I know that OEO numbers, it really comes down to the way that we report weatherization in Vermont. Like weatherization assistance program generally produces higher emissions reductions than EVT funded projects, because EVT funded projects use the TRM to quantify savings at the end of a project, which is more of a prescriptive measure. They'll do the project and then kind of plop it into the TRM, and then it spits out like a savings number. Those savings numbers are derated to account for errors that might have occurred during installation, whereas OEO numbers are taken at face value because they're measured on site. So that's why I think if you look at weatherization like projects or emissions reductions from weatherization, average emissions reductions, you might see that EVT and other EEU funded projects are generally lower than OEO. It's because there's less on-site verification, I think. So it's a little nuanced, but
no, I know, I get that there's nuance, and it is helpful to know that could have some flexibility. I do think the point stands. I mean, I think until we get like how many credits does this produce and what's the going rate for credits, and we get some sort of economic feedback, I'm just worried that like this is just producing the wrong incentives, and I don't really see a way out of that. I mean, it's not like I'm the first person to point out this whole like low cost solutions market model is going to cause some problems. We know that with the enabling upgrades and stuff. We've talked about that as a group, and I think our final report really needs to hammer that home, that's totally absent from that. But yeah, I just don't know. Like, I worry it's going to be too late to get in the final report, but just an indication of there's not much potential in these projects, so we won't be incentivizing weatherization. And, the state is also kind of counting on it in a significant way, in a way that doesn't really speak to it. So I'm guessing in the early years, there's not going to be like a market incentive to do weatherization beyond people tackling the credit streams from like the WAP program that are already kind of chugging along and riding off of like state and federal money.
That's why I think the model shows a ton of clean fuels adoption in the early years to kind of hit those targets initially, which I think is probably true. I mean, it's the lowest cost, way to enter the market for obligated parties. And then I think what the study also contemplated too was that, like the LMI target as laid out, the 16% that we've been discussing, that has to happen by statute. So, for example, the potential study model that, let's max out weatherization for the low income sector because it statutorily has to occur. Whereas market rate might have, at some points might have been filtered out because of an economic loading order. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack from the potential study, and we're working on it. I guess I don't want to go too much more until I've looked into it. Yeah.
No, I guess I just think like I think the model could change, and I'm glad you kind of flagged that the department does think that there's some tinkering to do. I guess I just still feel I don't know that the state has really recognized, like, I think that's like, oh, we're gonna do these things to help people, and it's like, but you're not really offering incentives. You're offering sort of base requirements, and there's some federal and state cash floating around, but like the clean heat standard itself is really stacked against this paradigm of delivering measures into people's homes beyond this sort of sliver that you say you have to do, and it's not clear that it's even achievable at the low income end. So I don't know. I mean, we're here to come up with solutions, not just complain about the clean heat standard. I just think maybe the architecture of our report really needs to kind of highlight that, like, we can't pretend that this kind of low cost solutions plus some caveats plus some rebates and stuff is going to achieve these outcomes, because it's not set up to do that. So I don't know what you do with that, though. That's not a policy suggestion.
Yeah, I think it also is apparent, I guess we'll see what happens, but that, the legislature, there may be, obviously is going to be some debate around how to move forward, what to move forward with on the clean heat standard, given the results of the potential study, and what's going to unfold over the next few months. So there's, it's still TBD. But yeah, I think you're right. From an equity perspective, we know this is a largely regressive policy. It's going to affect everyone the way that it's currently set up. So yeah, we just need to point that out. I think that's what we're here for.
Yeah, and I think we can return to this idea about the relative value of different measures, and hopefully we'll get sort of better information. But I think if we learn nothing from the outside of the potential study, I do think it's worth flagging in our final report, like, hey, like you say you're going to do a lot of weatherization, and like that's a low value according to this report. Like, that's something that I'm hoping we can get more detail on that. I just think it's worth flagging that, like, the state might need to think about other ways to tackle that problem if we see a value in weatherization, which I think we all do. But
I think it's seen as a foundational, energy efficiency measure that you can then do fuel switching, such as adding a heat pump later on. I think that's the proper order in which to do it. But if really we're after emissions reduction, what the potential study might suggest is that, yeah, it might be better just to go for the heat pumps first and then energy efficiency measures later. So yeah, it's a very nuanced picture. I think a state policy of having weatherization first is a good one, but are the targets in bounds? For example, does it make sense to go full in on that and secondary for everything else? Yeah.
We should just flag it. I think it should show up in our final report, and we can see if we have, you know, data that complicates that picture or gives us more indication. I just think it should be like, you know, this is providing, like, this type of market information is going to provide incentives, and they're not necessarily the ones that the state like says it wants. So I think that's worth flagging. So
There for sure. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Another thing is I did actually email TJ, but I'm sure he gets a lot of emails about so the study talks about advanced thermostats, which I take to be something like a Nest thermostat. That is
Yep.
not a list of eligible measures, but I don't know if it's like in the subtext or they're talking about adding it. Do you have any context for
Yep.
like what that came from?
Yeah, and I apologize. I think I was on that email.
It was like 2
Yeah,
days
we've
ago. I
been
was
with
just nosy.
the release of the potential study, we've
Yeah,
been
I'm sure.
quite busy. Yeah,
Yeah,
so that is couched into the, I believe it's measure number 1, which would be, trying to find the list. I believe it's envelope improvements and energy efficiency. Just want to get the
okay. Yeah, I was fine. I just was chatting with Rick casually about this, and I was like, is that included or not included? He didn't know
thermal
if
energy
that was
efficiency
included.
improvement. Yeah, so it'll reduce, it's a energy efficiency improvement for the heating system that would be controlling. So
Well, I do have some concerns about because like I can buy one on Amazon now, and like that's not something I think you can get like a little bit of a rebate, but like confirming it has a different flavor than other installed measures. Like I assume it is an installed measure because it's I don't know, that's just different. I guess like Emily, Efficiency Vermont will give you a rebate for a Nest thermometer. They used to, right?
Yeah, I'll post some information on that rebate in the chat.
Okay.
It's not on the top of my head, but yeah, give me 1 minute.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I was just kind of casually thinking, like, I think we got one when we bought our house, and we bought a bunch of them and stuff. I was just wondering, like, it's just a different flavor of verifying. You don't need a contractor to install it. You just got a receipt from Amazon. I don't. I mean, that kind of makes me worry that this is again. I know it's not like we'll be doing the most of this or the most dollar amount. It's just it's really high up on the list as like a thing that's going to contribute to it, and like it's different than their stuff.
it's a good catch. Yeah, it's. I think my guess is that it ended up on higher up on the the top 10 measures by their emission reductions because it is so easily adapted to almost every single home.
It's cheap. Yeah, I mean
Um,
it's yeah, anyone can do this basically, you know.
um, same with faucet aerators. I don't it's probably a good thing we're not seeing those in the top 10 measures, but yeah, those are a little more nuanced as well. It depends on water pressure, etc. The opinion dynamics, the PUC's consultant, is characterizing those measures as part of the technical reference manual. So there's going to be, more light shed on how those are accounted for in emissions reductions. Also worth noting that, NV5 and opinion dynamics, communicated on those measure characterizations. So essentially, the measure characterizations that went into the potential study are, to my knowledge, I think all of them are almost exactly the same. So that's good. But because the measure characterizations are still being worked on, they haven't been released, by opinion dynamics yet. I believe that's forthcoming next month. So, but yeah, it's a good catch. I would agree on that one with the advanced thermostat. That would be considered, I think, a low income eligible measure, considering they can go into a mobile home or really anywhere that has a heating system. So
Yeah, I mean you'd run into the problems of verifying it, and that kind of becomes less cost effective. It could probably
yeah,
it's more than the cost of the rebate or the project, but I mean you could envision a contractor who's doing the work in a low income household also throwing some of these in and throwing off some more credits. As if I was just more like, oh, it's not a bad idea. It's just one, I think it has a different flavor of other stuff in terms of verification that it's doing stuff. And
agreed.
yeah, I was just surprised to see that like way up on the list. I get why, but was a little surprising.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I
for
mean, yeah, I can see how that. Yeah, I think there's wiggle room in the eligible measures. I was kind of like, yeah, is this something that needs to make its way back into statute for an asterisk, or is the PUC all over that? Yeah.
I think
It's
that
my understanding they'll be doing they have to do the economic analysis for this for the potential study. I believe they're doing probably going to shoot. They got to do that before January 15th, so they're going to be digging into that.
I
Yeah.
kind of remember, sorry, Ben, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Worries, yeah, nope.
I kind of remember, I don't remember the exact details, but in the technical advisory groups, like subgroup on this work, on the TRM work, we did kind of flag both the thermostat and the faucet aerator
Mm.
as like surprising measures we saw in the early wind measure characterization list. And I remember the PUC kind of heard that discourse between the tag and opinion dynamics. So just wanted to flag that subgroup did also find those measures as interesting and had a brief discussion on them.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I never want to be like, oh, this modeling thing is easy, or that like I'm the only one who's like thought about these things. I was just looking at some of this and I'm like, oh, I have some questions about how you got there. But yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I think it's a larger question about, I think this group is kind of the most technical details of the EAG, and it is a question of we don't want to duplicate what the tag is doing. But I think not thinking about like how these credits are actually going to work in real life is also a disservice to our larger equity mission. So maybe it's just, I think we can probably take a week or two off of credit issues because, we have a little bit until the draft rule comes out, and we're going to be meeting a lot, when that happens. So I think it's just being open-minded and thinking about like ways that our working group in particular, and the full EAG can sort of stay engaged with the data and the text of what's coming out in ways that's kind of hard for me to nail down. I don't know about you.
And I hope that very much looking forward to that conversation and seeing that draft rule. Because there's gonna be a lot there, of course, and a lot to comment on. I hope other EAG members are, as excited as I am, I suppose, or just at least read it. Which I'm so looking forward to some robust conversation there. So
Okay. Well, I think we'll bring, the conversation. Like, I think it'll be helpful to have you, Ben, or Emily, raise your hand and just be like, well, this is how to characterize this low income credit void, and like we talked about it but didn't have necessarily a solution to that. Yeah, I mean, I think it also might be helpful, Ben, if you want to share kind of what TJ shared before the presentation about like the benefits and drawbacks of the potential study, and like the cost data is out there, and I think I did some back of the envelope calculations, and like yeah, the dollar per gallon increase on fuel is like data you can get from there. It's just whether you take that to be, grounded in what's going to actually happen. So I do think it'll be good for us to have a conversation about what's in there and what's not, and what more information we can expect to get, because there's a lot just like in the ambient like media about this. So I think it'll be good
there
for us.
sure is. So I can definitely preface our conversation and say a few words about the potential study. Noting yet again that it's not an implementation plan, and that, as you just noted, while there is cost, it really depends on how you do that calculation, because you can end up at very different results. And then to that end, that's why I've been mentioning that the department is, basically we're just doing some fact checking and QC/QA on our end, because we, also didn't really have we were waiting for the final product to be done as well before we started that. So I think, given that we are the department, that's sort of our job to make sure we are being as accurate as possible for the ratepayers of Vermont. So that's kind of built into our mission for sure. So yeah, I'm more than happy to talk about that on Tuesday next week.
Yeah, we can tee that off, and then we can mention that it did feed into our credit issues discussion a little bit about what to do about that, and I don't know if we want to get into a full discussion about the value of different credits, since there is so much unknown stuff, but I do think we'll have to grapple with it eventually. But
Right. Yeah. I'm very much looking forward to the tag coming up with, what the unit is going to be. Um, because there's kilograms of CO2, there's tons of CO2. What's the right size for the credit market here in Vermont?
Mhm.
One ton might be too big. A kilogram might be too small. So
Yeah, I've been having trouble even like conceptually talking. Like if I'm an obligated party and I need to get like 100 credits, like 1,000 credits, 10,000 credits, like I don't like understand what scale that we should be talking about, like just in terms of like what a credit unit feels like, and like what makes up a credit, like how many credits are in a project, which I don't think inhibits the understanding of like how the marketplace will generally work at a high level. It's just funny because I don't know if like the examples I'm throwing out about credit transactions are even like remotely connected to what the numbers will be, but it's
well, I don't think you're the only one. So
it's just
that's for sure.
yeah. Okay, well, I think this was good. I think we're in agreement on the memo. I think, as Emily said, we just need to make sure that people understand that like we have talked about this, and we do not think this is doing a disservice to low and moderate income households. And why we think that. Yeah. And I think we took care of all the language, so I'll just send that along to Ashira and ask her to include the note in the agenda, which should be coming out soon.
Sure. Yeah, with more time, I think, to discuss this and hear folks' concerns on the group, I foresee it being, getting ready for a vote, I think.
Okay, yeah, I'll see what we can do in time. It's always kind of a mess, but we'll do what we can. Sounds
Yeah,
good.
sure.
Anything else I'm missing that you two want to talk about?
Not for
Nope.
me. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Mia.
Okay,
No.
thank you both. Yeah, I
Thanks.
will stop the recording and I'll see you next week.
All right. Have a great day. Yeah, we'll see you.